Chapter 31 Whispers. Mia shrugged. I don't know, she remarked honestly, while picking up her bag. Mr. Ice Cube was a strange man with a great deal of temperament. His behaviors were unpredictable. He hadn't spoken more than a few words the entire time she sat down before him, as he was busy pressing his phone. And yet, he commanded her not to go, and stormed out when Rain came out. Such a strange man, Mia thought, as she tugged her friend's arm towards the door of the rooftop. Are you ready to head home? Rain asked, as they exited the library. Mia nodded. Yep, there's nothing else to do in school, she remarked. Their class schedules were always short on Fridays, and since she hadn't been able to find any part-time job in the institute, she would rather go home early to think about some other options. Have you shopped for the dresses you'll be wearing for the school contest next month? We only have 3 weeks and a few days left. If you haven't, we can schedule to go together tomorrow, Rain suggested, as they walked towards the limo that always picked her up from school. Though Rain's suggestion was harmless and friendly, Mia felt her heart sink. She forced herself to smile. I won't be free tomorrow. I have something scheduled, perhaps next time. It wasn't a lie. She indeed had an outing scheduled with Owen tomorrow. And even though she would love to go shopping with her only friend, she wouldn't be able to afford it, and she wasn't the kind to live off a friend because they were rich. Oh, all right. Just let me know when you'd like to go shopping. I'd be honored to go with you, just to get away from my annoying brother. Your brother? You mean Jason? Is he back from the military? I thought you said he has been away for a while, Mia mused, as she recalled all the times her friend would complain about her older brother being an asshole for meddling in her life. He would always monitor her movements and do a background check for all her friends. And because of him, Rain had no boyfriend, even though she was old enough to have one. Rain sighed dejectedly. Yep, I wonder why he decided to suddenly live in the house when he has his own mansion. Let's not talk about my brother. He's just going to ruin my mood again, she said. And when they reached the gleaming limo, the chauffeur opened the door for Rain, who turned to her friend and said, I know you will say no, but let me try again. Should we drop you off at home? Mia had her reasons for always rejecting her friend's offer to drive her home. She didn't want any scandal in the town she lived in. But then, looking at Rain's pleading eyes, Mia sighed and, for the first time in her almost 2 years studying in Ivy Grove, she nodded. All right, but let me warn you, I live on Whispering Way Street, she said. Rain, who had no idea what Whispering Way Street looked like, told her chauffeur to drop her friend there before they headed home. The chauffeur's expression looked hesitant for a moment when he heard the location. He couldn't help but wonder what his young miss was doing with a girl who lives in a place like that. If Master Jason found out his sister was mingling with the poor, he wouldn't like it and would end up scolding the innocent chauffeur for even driving the car to a street like that. However, despite his reluctance, the chauffeur started the ignition and drove to the poorest town in Zen. When the gleaming limo with tinted windows drove into Whispering Way Street, everyone walking down the street, or sitting down in groups, stopped to look at the black car. They couldn't help but wonder who was inside it. They rarely have rich people visiting their town, and judging from the car, they could all tell the person must be rich. And just to feed their curiosity, a few people started to follow the car to see which of the buildings it would stop at. As the limo came to a stop in front of the apartment building where Mia lived, the people were astonished. They waited in anticipation to see who would come out of the car, and when the chauffeur opened the car door and they saw Mia step out, the people gasped in surprise. Some looked at her in envy for driving home in such an expensive car. Mrs. Dennis, who was known for being the leader of gossipers in Whispering Way, leaned towards the other women next to her and said, I told you all, that girl isn't going to such an expensive school to study. She's a slut just like her mama, and look at that handsome man who opened the car door, she must be screwing him in school. The middle-aged woman said with so much dislike in her voice, assuming the chauffeur was the owner of the car. I can't believe this. I used to think she was a good girl, but look how she is shamelessly stepping out of the car. Well, it's no surprise, like mother, like daughter. Very soon she will get pregnant and drop out of that school. Tisk. What a waste for such a beautiful girl, said another woman, as they watched Mia walk into the building. Mia, who had just walked up the long stairs that led to their apartment room, sighed as she opened the door to the room. She would have asked Rain to come in for a cup of coffee, but when she'd met her friend's astonished and disbelief-filled expression when the car had entered the town, she had refrained from suggesting that. It was only natural for any rich person to feel like that when seeing a place like Whispering Way, and the last thing she wanted was to invite her friend in and later get heartbroken if she wasn't comfortable in their house. Mia dropped down on her bed the moment she entered her room. She was too exhausted, both emotionally and physically. She just wanted to take a short nap before she would go down to meet her mother in the eatery. However, her short nap turned into a long one. She didn't wake up until it was already dusk. And she wouldn't have woken up if she hadn't felt a hand gently stroking her hair. Mia jolted awake and impulsively smacked the hand away, quickly sitting up only to notice it was Owen sitting at the edge of her bed, laughing down at her. Mia rubbed her eyes to wipe away her sleepiness before she glanced around and noticed the sky was darkening through her window. She had slept for far too long. She had intended to just take a short nap. She glanced at Owen with a frown. "What were you doing hovering over me while I sleep?" she asked, her voice slightly husky from sleep. "I came to check on you, but you smacked me pretty hard," he joked, rubbing the hand she had hit. He had come into her room after he'd heard some whispers going around the town about Mia being dropped off by a limo. The people were saying a man had dropped her off and he seemed to be rich. Owen had felt a stab in his heart and a surge of anger. And when one of the neighborhood boys patted his shoulder, saying, "Hey man, it seems your girl has finally caught a big fish. You will soon be blacklisted from her life." Owen, who rarely got into a fight, had lost his cool and hit the young man. Mia was off limits to any man, and he wasn't going to allow any person to take her away from him. He had loved her even before he knew what love was, and he had sworn to work hard, finish his school, and make her his. But today, he had been angered beyond words when he heard a man had dropped her off. He had even stormed into her room without caring if she would get mad at the fact that he didn't knock. But when he opened the door, he had been surprised to find her curled up on the bed, sleeping peacefully like a baby. Owen's anger had immediately vanished through the window at her sleeping face. He hadn't been able to resist touching her. Thus, he had sat on the edge of her bed and gently stroked her long, curly hair. She looked even more beautiful while asleep. He was just about to feel her cheeks against his palm when she woke up and smacked his hand away. And now that she was awake, Owen couldn't help but feel his heart skip a beat as he caught her glancing at him with her large brown eyes. He observed as she stretched her arms, her little actions causing her chest to push forward, and he couldn't help but notice her ample bosom straining against her shirt. Clearing his throat, he quickly looked away. "What brings you to my room?" she inquired, getting off the bed. Owen didn't bother concealing the reason for coming into her room. He asked directly, "Is it true that a limo dropped you off at home?" Clenching his fingers around the purple bedsheet, he awaited her response. He didn't care who the person was that had dropped her off, but he would confront them regardless of their wealth and break their bones for even thinking for a second that Mia wasn't taken already. Mia frowned upon hearing his question. But then, recalling that she had been dropped off in Rain's car, she burst out laughing. "I can see that the whispers have started circulating in town. The people here never cease to amaze me with their gossip. Yes, Rain dropped me off today. You remember her, my friend I used to tell you about. I couldn't find it in my heart to refuse her kind offer, so I agreed for her to give me a ride." What the hell, Owen?" she exclaimed as he suddenly stood up and enveloped her in his strong arms, pressing her face against his chest. "What a relief," he sighed. He had been driving himself crazy, thinking that she had fallen for some wealthy boy at her school, but it turned out to be only her female friend. Mia, who was crushed in his embrace, quickly pushed away from him and glared up at his smiling face. "What was that for? You know how much I don't like being hugged all of a sudden. Now get out, I need to take a shower." She pushed him towards the door, but before she could push him out completely, he said, all right. I'll leave, but don't forget you promised to go out with me tomorrow." "Yeah, I know. Bye." She laughed and slammed the door on his face. Chapter 32 I Need Your Help, Harrison. After Mia had finished her shower and changed into more comfortable clothing, a baggy shirt and knee-length shorts, she went out to meet her mother at the eatery. As usual, she had dinner there with Owen and her mother. When they finished eating, Mia realized her mother had run out of her blood pressure pills. She took some money from the safe and walked to the pharmacy to buy the prescribed medication for her mother. Knowing her mother would have already gone home, Mia didn't bother going to the eatery and instead went straight home, humming to herself. However, as she was about to enter the building, a voice called out from behind her. "Hey, Mia, wait up. I need a minute of your time," said the person. Upon hearing the voice, Mia rolled her eyes. Not now, she thought, as she turned to see a blonde girl approaching with a wide smile. The girl was wearing a very short red dress that barely covered her thighs, and her not-so-beautiful face was masked with heavy makeup, making her look like a living ghost. Her cheap heels made it difficult for her to walk properly as she approached Mia. Mia quickly forced a smile and greeted, "Hey, Julie, long time no see." "What's up?" she asked. To be honest, Mia didn't like the young woman very much. They were neighbors in the apartment complex, but they rarely spoke to each other. Julie believed Mia was a show-off and a snob after Mia had turned down Julie's proposal for her to join her and her other friends in their secret escort business 3 years ago. Since then, Julie had held a grudge, saying Mia was an ungrateful bitch. Julie stood before Mia with a weird smile that only made her appear creepy due to her heavy makeup and the deep red lipstick on her thin lips. "I heard you got escorted by a rich man, so tell me, have you finally decided to also step into the business?" She eyed Mia up and down, taking in her simple home outfit. Julie had disliked Mia because she believed the girl was a bitch and a pretending snob, who acted all innocent and too good to be true. Mia didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the fact that everyone in town thought the car she was dropped off in belonged to one of her so-called rich men. It seemed that if you were poor, you couldn't have a normal life without being accused of selling your body. However, she sighed and replied, "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Excuse me, I need to take this medicine to my mom." "Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about, Mia. Don't be greedy. If you'd be nice enough to introduce me to some of your rich male friends, I would really appreciate it. Besides, I am not judging you for going to school to screw men. I can understand what your family is going through, and it is only natural for you to do that to earn money," Julie remarked smilingly. Even though she didn't like Mia, she would do anything just to get introduced to some handsome, wealthy man that would drive her home in a limo. Besides, she had always known that this Mia wasn't as innocent as she appeared, and today proved that. No girl in Whispering Way had ever been driven home in such a car, and because Mia had, she was the top topic of the town now. Julie also wanted to get on top, and if it meant getting on the girl's good side, she was willing to. Ignoring Julie's persistent remarks, Mia briskly walked into the building, leaving the blonde girl behind calling for her to wait for a second. She would be damned to wait and hear all Julie's nonsense talk. As Mia climbed the long steps to their apartment, she felt a sense of relief, distancing herself from the drama outside. Entering their apartment, Mia handed the medication to her mom, exchanged a brief goodnight, and then headed to her own room. Checking the time, she noted it was already 11 p.m. The day had taken its toll, and Mia felt the weight of exhaustion settling in. However, she wasn't sleepy because of her afternoon nap that had lasted until this evening. Spotting her cat perched on the window, Mia couldn't resist its comforting presence. "Hey, Robbie." She sat on the fluffy sofa beside the window, absent-mindedly petting the cat as her thoughts drifted. In the quiet of the evening, her mind wandered to the one thing that always brought her solace, her guitar, which she wouldn't be able to buy anytime soon with how she couldn't find any decent work. A tinge of sadness crossed her face as she longed for the familiar strings beneath her fingers. Lacking the guitar, Mia began to sing softly. Her melodic voice filled the room, carrying a sweet and angelic tone that contrasted with the harsh realities of her surroundings. As she continued to sing, she was completely unaware that her voice was leading someone to her window. In the soothing rhythm of her own song, Mia found a temporary escape from the heaviness in her heart. The cat nestled closer, seemingly appreciating the music. Lost in the melody, Mia's expression softened. She inhaled the gentle breeze that blew into the room from the window. She sat there for a while, looking up at the moon in the night sky. Feeling a sense of calm wash over her after the song, Mia decided it was time to get some sleep. She left the window open, allowing the night breeze to gently rustle the purple, thin curtains. She disliked sleeping in complete darkness. She preferred the soft glow of the bedside lamp over complete darkness, so she turned off the room lights before settling into her bed. As she closed her eyes and began to drift off, a sudden movement and sound jolted her awake. Her eyes snapped open. What was that? She turned toward the window where she'd heard the sound. In the dim light, she noticed a dark shadow struggling to climb up. Her eyes widened, and panic surged through her as she saw the silhouette against the curtains. What was that? Could it be some monster or a pervert, or even a thief trying to enter her room? Fear gripped her, and she quickly leapt out of bed, grabbing the closest object, a thick book from her bedside table. Heart-pounding, Mia raised the thick book above her head as she approached the window, ready to defend herself against whatever was trying to enter her room, despite the fact that her room was on the top floor. However, it seemed the intruder lost their grip and fell into the room with a loud thud. Mia's scream echoed through the room as she flung the book away and jumped back. She fumbled to switch on the light. The sudden illumination revealed a man, sprawled on the fluffy sofa beside her window. However, before she could scream out, "Bloody murderer," she immediately recognized the man when he turned his head to look at her with a pained expression. His gray eyes were darker than usual. "Oi, what are you doing in my room, Mr. Oh my God, what happened to you?" Her eyes widened as she noticed the blood seeping from the side of his stomach. Shock and fear paralyzed Mia for a moment before she registered Mr. Bennet was in her room, bleeding heavily. Blood, Mia thought, as she stared at the red liquid that was now soaking her sofa. Instead of approaching him, she went pale at the sight of blood, and her body began to tremble violently. "Help me," came Mr. Bennet's strained voice. "I need your help, Harrison." Chapter 33. A few hours ago, after Neil left the rooftop where he had been interrupted by that damned Jason's sister, Rain, he had left the university immediately to go and prepare for the meeting. He drove his black Ferrari straight to his condo, took a quick shower, and dressed into more casual black trousers and a shirt. Pulling on his black leather jacket, he took his motorcycle keys from the table. Though Neil hadn't eaten since morning, he didn't bother to stay back to eat anything. He was already used to forgetting about his mealtimes. Ever since he'd taken it upon himself to be a soldier, Neil had little to no regard for his own personal life and health. He could have one meal a day and be fine for the whole day. Furthermore, he always had his Nutrafil capsules with him. They are capsules that, when taken, ensure the person receives essential nutrients without the need for meals. Neil always carried it with him, despite being aware of the potential side effects that could arise from taking it regularly. However, he didn't care. As per his usual routine, he retrieved it from his kitchen cabinets and swallowed a pill before leaving his condo. Walking down the elegant hallway of his complex apartment building, he entered the elevator accompanied by two women. Throughout the elevator ride, they giggled and whispered to each other while stealing glances at him. Their mere presence was already irritating, and their giggling made him want to kick them out of the elevator. To him, women were creatures that would forever cause the downfall of a man if given the chance, and they annoyed him to no end. Finally stepping out of the elevator, he made his way through the lobby where all heads turned to get a glimpse of him, as if it were the first time they had seen him in the building. The people in the lobby couldn't help but admire the sight of the handsome man walking out. Though a few knew that he resided in the luxurious skyscraper apartment, they rarely witnessed him engaging or acknowledging anyone in the building. The only time he had spoken was when a wealthy young heiress attempted to buy her way into his condo. She ended up being humiliated in the lobby when he threatened to cut off the limbs of anyone who trespassed on his property. Neil disregarded all the stares directed at him and rode his motorcycle out of the bustling city towards the deserted mansion where their military meetings usually took place. As he entered the gate, the rows of cars and motorcycles parked outside the mansion came into view. The last place he wanted to be in at this moment was in the same room as Jason. However, he had no choice. Neil swiftly flung his legs off the bike, the roar of the engine lingering in the air as he removed his helmet with a practiced motion. His chiseled features and imposing stature commanded attention as he confidently strode towards the mansion's door. The few new recruit soldiers milling around the entrance immediately halted their conversations. "Major General," they all saluted him to show respect as he passed into the mansion. Even before he entered the dining hall where the meeting took place, Neil could already hear the loud laughter and chattering of the soldiers. How could men talk and laugh this loud, like they were women in a gossip room? He thought to himself with a shake of his head. Pathetic. Entering the huge dining hall, the atmosphere immediately shifted. The laughter and chatter ceased as Neil's presence demanded respect. A sudden hush fell upon the room as if the king of hell had just stepped in and sealed their mouths. The soldiers who were lower than Neil in rank all stood up to show respect. However, Jason didn't, even though Neil was higher than him in military rank. His gaze locked onto Neil, his hazel eyes narrowing with disdain. Jason muttered, well, the country's favorite soldier has finally decided to grace us with his presence." Since General David, Neil's uncle, hadn't arrived, the soldiers could do as they pleased. Ignoring Jason's mockery, Neil continued toward the table where Liam had reserved a seat for him. The soldier's eyes tracked him as he walked towards his friend, curiosity and tension lingering in the air. As Neil took his seat beside Liam, he offered a curt nod of acknowledgement to him. Liam patted Neil's back, saying, "We were waiting for you to arrive. General David said he wouldn't make it here, but he would call when we are all present and talk on the phone." Hearing that his uncle wouldn't come here in person, Neil couldn't help but slightly sigh in relief. As everyone settled in their seats, Jason couldn't resist needling Neil again. "What have you been doing in Ivy Grove Institute for so long? Haven't discovered the rat in the university yet? Or have you finally decided to have some fun with the female students?" Neil maintained his composure, staring ahead. "I'm here for the meeting, not to have idle banter with a loser," he remarked nonchalantly as he leaned his back comfortably against his chair. Jason was just an idiot who failed to make himself known in the military and believed anyone who came before him and got a higher rank was because of a connection. However, his longtime resentment with Neil had way past just the rank issue, because the unfortunate incident that took place 2 years ago had caused them to hate each other beyond words. Before Jason could open his mouth and retort to Neil, the intercom on the dining table buzzed, and everyone's attention turned to it, knowing that General David was on the line. Jason was the one to press the answer button and pick the call. And when the man's stern voice rang from the intercom, they all greeted him in unison. "Is every one of you present?" General David questioned, and they all replied with a, "Yes, sir." General David's stern voice cut through the air. "Wayner, update us on your progress at Ivy Grove." Neil clenched his fists to mask his emotions. He replied to his uncle blankly, "I've investigated most professors and they are all clean of any connections with the Doc Kroll gangs. But I haven't gotten to investigate the university counselor." An angry roar erupted from the intercom. "What's holding you back from investigating him, Wayner? We need that information." Neil recalled the only day he'd finally gotten the chance to enter the counselor's office was the day he had stumbled across the hallway where Mia was being hit by that damn boy, Alaric. For days, he had tried to get into the man's office and get access to his computer, but the counselor rarely stepped out of his office without locking it with special keys. Only that day did Neil have the chance to get in, as he'd managed to trick the man out, only to fall upon that scene where he'd seen Mia get hit. Neil wasn't the kind to neglect the importance of his mission, but he also couldn't walk away from the scene without doing anything. And he had been looking forward to beating some sense into that boy. However, Neil dared not let General David know that he had let such an opportunity slide because of some girl. Thus, he said, "The counselor's office is difficult to penetrate. He rarely leaves, and I need a strategic moment." Before Neil could explain further, Jason interjected, "Maybe we shouldn't have given Wayner this mission. Just like 2 years ago, he's proving to be unfit." Neil felt his blood boil at the fact that Jason kept bringing up the past incident that had been long buried away. Neil had gone through so much therapy just to let go of that incident, but no matter what, whenever he was reminded of it, he wanted to die and end his own life as a punishment for his mistake 2 years ago, which he also blamed Jason for as much as he blamed himself. "You son of a bitch!" Seething with anger, Neil stood up to get to Jason but was quickly held back by Liam, who held his hand and pushed him back down on the chair. General David's voice thundered from the intercom, "Wallace, how many times did I have to tell you never to bring up that incident? Another word of it from you, you will face the consequences." He reprimanded Jason before he addressed his nephew, "Wayner, what about the girl who gave that information to the news agencies about the first shipment? Have you gotten her to tell you how she got the information?" he asked. "Yes," Neil replied curtly as he was trying his best to hold himself from slamming his fists against Jason's smug face. "Then what was the outcome? Have you gotten her to take you to the place where she'd found the information?" "No, you need to get all those done before I tell you to do it. Get someone to draw the description of the men she'd seen. And you have 3 weeks to get the information about the Doc Kroll gang operative in that university, no matter what it takes." Then the intercom went silent as the general had ended the call. Neil didn't wait to talk to any of the soldiers in the room. He stood up and stormed out of the mansion with his friend following closely behind him. When they walked towards Neil's motorcycle, Liam stopped him. "Neil, I know how you feel about your uncle after what he did for you 2 years ago. But trust me, he did it for your own good. Do you think you'd still be here with us if General David hadn't interfered with the incident's investigation report?" No. So please don't let Jason or anybody's words get to you and focus on bringing down the Da Kroll gang. Liam patted his friend's back as he could feel the rage emitting from him. Deciding to change the topic as he could feel Neil's anger, Liam said, I got you the guitar you asked for, a brand new one from Harmony Lux Virtuoso, the world's most expensive guitar brand. However, you better refund my money because I spent a huge sum to get my hands on one of those darn guitars. When Neil had asked him to get the guitar, he had first been surprised. But then, knowing his friend's taste in good quality things, Liam had gone out of his way to get the guitar from the world's most expensive brand. And when he said he wanted a refund, he wasn't joking because he had spent a fortune on just the guitar. Though the money Liam spent was nothing to his bank account, he just couldn't let go of the sum he'd spent to buy something he was sure his friend would end up destroying because of his strong dislike for music. Neil didn't argue with Liam for the refund. He swiftly took out his phone and tapped on the keyboard before handing it to Liam. Transfer the money to your account. Where is the guitar? He asked as Liam shamelessly took the phone and began to tap in several numbers. It's in my car. He handed Neil back the phone after making sure he'd received the alert from his own bank. Then, they walked back to Liam's white car parked at the side. Have fun destroying the guitar, he remarked while handing the brand new instrument to Neil. Chapter 34 Bleeding Wound. After Neil took the guitar from Liam, he carried it to his motorcycle and slung the case on his back before kicking the bike to life. Though Mia didn't know that he was the one who broke her guitar, he had decided to buy her a new one, seeing how much the girl still enjoyed the instrument he had taught her years ago when they were still kids. And the other reason he had decided to buy the guitar for her was because he was determined to find out what went wrong that made the girl not remember her life in Mirage Mesa. Did something happen to her family after he left Mirage Mesa? He wanted to find out everything for his own satisfaction. Neil rode his motorcycle into the dark road at night, feeling the wind tousle his black hair, since he didn't have his helmet on. He wanted to go to some bar and drown his sorrows in alcohol, hoping it would distract him from the weight of his responsibilities as a soldier and as a human being. Besides taking down the criminal organization known as Da Kroll, Neil had no other aspirations in life. He had no dreams and desires. He had long given up on his dreams of becoming a successful businessman like his late father. He had once looked forward to his adulthood because he wanted to work as the next CEO of his family's company. Now, his only motivation was to complete his mission and bring an end to Da Kroll. Over the years, this illegal group had been involved in drug and diamond smuggling, managing to evade the authorities with their hidden locations and secret identities. When Da Kroll started engaging in acts of terrorism and smuggling deadly weapons, the military stepped in. However, long before the military's involvement, Neil had taken matters into his own hands when he joined the army, because one of the members of Da Kroll had caused the death of his family 15 years ago. Each member of the higher-ups of the organization had a distinct red tattoo on their wrist, and he could never forget the night when the man with the red tattoo had shot and killed his father and his lovely mother, who had done nothing but taught him how to be kind and generous to every person regardless of their class. Now the only memory of her he remembered was seeing her lying in a pool of her blood with her eyes wide open. As the past memories began to consume him again, Neil's grip on the bike's handle tightened, and the vivid images flashed through his mind, playing like a broken record. His body began to tremble violently, reliving the sight of his father and mother lying lifeless in their pool of blood. Almost colliding with a truck, Neil managed to regain control and abruptly pulled over to the side of the road. He struggled to calm his shaking body, taking deep breaths. After a long while, he finally calmed down. Looking around, he realized he had subconsciously ridden his bike to the intersection that led to Whispering Way Street. He hadn't intended to give the guitar to her tonight, but since he had reached here, Neil decided to hand it to her. He also wanted to calm his mind with the familiar melody of the guitar in her voice. That night when she sang his once favorite song, Neil had surprisingly felt a sense of peace in his mind, a peace he'd never felt even when he drowned himself in alcohol. And right at this moment, he wanted to feel that peace again. He wanted to hear that melodic voice and music. Neil didn't care how late it was getting. He kicked his bike to life and headed towards the streets. However, as he was riding into the town, his eyes fell on a man exiting a store. The man had the same scar on his face like the one Mia had described to him. He had been able to see the man's face because of the lights outside the store, and Neil immediately pulled to a stop. He swiftly got off his motorcycle and followed the alleyway the man entered. Neil had no weapon with him, but he was confident in his fighting skills if the man turned out to be the same as the one Mia had seen. He had been looking for leads to get to the leaders of Da Kroll, and eventually to the one who killed his family, but for years, it hadn't been easy. In the dark alley, Neil quietly followed the man with the scar, trying not to be seen. He was careful to stay far away. Neil knew how to move without making noise, like a shadow in the night. And if the man was really the same as the one the girl had described, then he would have a sharp sense. As Neil followed him, he felt the man becoming aware. The man started walking faster, and he turned another corner. Neil also increased his pace and turned into the corner, only to find it empty and quiet. He looked around, but there was no trace of the man. It was like he had suddenly vanished into thin air. Neil muttered a curse as he realized he'd lost the man. Not finding the man after looking around for a while, he decided to step back and leave the alley. But just as he was turning away, something heavy hit against his head. For a moment, he almost lost his balance from dizziness, but he quickly recovered. The man with the scar was standing there, ready to hit him again. Neil acted fast, kicking the man away with his legs. But things got more serious when the man fell back and got up, pulling out a hidden gun and aimed it at Neil. Because of the darkness in the corner, Neil could barely see his face clearly, but he saw him pointing the gun at him. He also heard his hoarse, serious voice as he asked, "Who the hell are you, and why are you following me?" Neil, not scared by the gun, looked at the man and said, "If you're innocent, why are you so alert?" "I'm just trying to find some answers, and it seems like you might have them," he remarked, while keeping his eyes on the gun pointed at him. The man chuckled darkly. "You must be one of those darned hidden authorities, but too bad. I will kill you before you can get any answers from my mouth." Before the man could pull the trigger, Neil had swiftly used his leg to kick at the iron the man had used to hit his head earlier. The iron went hurtling towards the man and landed directly on his face. Neil used the opportunity and grabbed the hand holding the gun and twisted it in the opposite direction. The man fell to the ground, groaning. However, before Neil could do any more damage to the man, he used his other hand and pulled out a small ankle gun. Because of the darkness, Neil didn't notice him in time until the man pointed it to his side and pulled the trigger. The gun didn't even make much noise because it had a suppressor attached to its muzzle. Neil was astonished at the fact that he had been shot by someone whose strength wasn't even comparable to his own. He stopped, frozen in place, as he pressed a hand to his side and felt the thick, warm, sticky liquid against his palm. And that was when he felt the burning pain of the bullet in his flesh. He didn't even realize when the man before him fled the corner until he looked up and found the place empty. Fuck. He gritted his teeth in annoyance as he felt his blood oozing out of the bullet wound. At this point, he couldn't go to any hospital because his disguise must not be known to anybody, as per protocol. The military were very strict on keeping their mission a secret from anybody who had no knowledge of their cover. If he were to go to a hospital, he would have to provide details of how he was shot to the authorities. And another protocol was that no police must know of the military mission because it had been investigated that a few authorities were involved with Da Kroll. One could never know who the mole was, so it was best if no policemen were alerted. Neil pressed a hand to his side to stop the bleeding as he walked out of the alleyway. He would ride back to Liam, who was an expert in removing bullets. However, to make matters worse for him, he couldn't find his motorcycle where he'd parked it a moment ago. "Great, just wonderful," he remarked under his breath, as he realized some thief in Whispering Way had stolen his bike. He was still carrying the guitar case on his back as he began to stumble down the street. He didn't know where he was going, but he kept walking in the quiet night streets. He didn't even realize he was approaching Mia's apartment building until he heard an angelic voice swirling in the night. The song, the voice, was just too soothing and familiar that Neil found himself following it. He was beginning to lose a lot of blood to the point he was starting to feel dizzy, but he continued to walk until he reached the huge, run-down apartment building where he noticed a girl in the top window singing. Though he couldn't see her face properly, he knew it was her. Neil knew what he was about to do was dangerous and stupid, but he had no other choice. He needed someone's assistance in removing the bullet. He couldn't call Liam because his friend's residence was far away from Whispering Way, and before he would get here, Neil might have passed out. Before Neil could call her name, she had backed away from the window. He saw the light of the room go off. He murmured another curse. Without any other options, he decided to climb up. Despite the pain in his side, Neil began to climb up the pipes and the neighboring window sills. It took all of his strength to get up there, and when he reached her window, he heard some movement in the room. And when he raised his leg to climb into the room, he heard her scream out. Neil lost his balance and fell on something soft beside the window. When she turned on the room's lights, he looked towards her and noticed her surprise upon recognizing him. "Wood, what are you doing in my room, Mr.? Oh my God, what happened to you?" she exclaimed the moment she noticed the blood. She didn't move again and stood frozen, staring at him in horror. Her face turned pale as she stared at his blood. He noticed she was slightly trembling. He didn't have much time to coax or ask her what was wrong. He managed to speak. "Help me." He choked out, "I need your help, Harrison." Chapter 35. The intruder in her room. Mia was immobilized at the sight of the blood. She couldn't move nor do anything, as her head began to bang like there was a hammer drilling holes in her brain. She grabbed her head with both her hands as she heard the voice from her nightmares ring in her head. "Do you know what will happen to your head once I pull the trigger, little girl? Your tiny head will blow off and your brain will come oozing out of your skull." Mia began to shake off the voice that kept ringing in her head. However, at that moment, there was a knock on the door of her room that snapped her back to reality. She looked back to the sofa beside her window and saw that Mr. Bennet was still lying there, looking at her with his eyes shadowed with pain. He was pressing a hand to his side where the blood continued to ooze out. What happened to him and why did he come into her room? Before Mia could say or do anything, another knock was heard on her door, but this time it was followed by her mother's worried voice. "Mia, what's wrong? I heard you scream. Are you all right?" Elizabeth asked from outside the door. She had been sleeping in the room next to her daughter when she heard her scream. Elizabeth had hurriedly rushed out to see if Mia was having one of her terrible nightmares. When Mia didn't reply, she tried to turn the doorknob and realized the door had been locked from the inside. "Mia, are you in there?" Elizabeth asked worriedly. Mia, who stared from Mr. Bennet to the turned doorknob, didn't know what to do. She had locked the door early because she didn't like Owen barging into her room. When she decided to open the door and have her mother help her take the professor to a hospital, Mr. Bennet shook his head and whispered, "Don't open the door. Tell her you are all right." Though he said those words in a whisper, there was a hint of command in it. Despite the fact that he was bleeding to death, the man still held that authoritative aura and commanding presence. Mia frowned, but then she did as he told her. "It's nothing, Mom, I'm fine." "Why did you scream?" came Elizabeth's question. "I saw a big rat enter through my window." "I'm fine. You should go back to sleep," Mia said, while approaching the bleeding man on her sofa, who glared at her for calling him a rat. "Did he cut himself while climbing the pipes?" she thought as she looked down at him. "All right. Make sure to close your window." "Good night," said Elizabeth, who tiredly returned to her room and fell back asleep immediately after laying on the bed. "What happened to you? Why are you bleeding?" she asked worriedly, as she looked around not knowing what to do for the man who had suddenly entered her room in the middle of the night. How did he even know which room she was staying in? His injuries didn't seem like a small cut from the blood that was soaking into her sofa. "I was shot, and I need you to remove the damn bullet from my—" "You were shot?" Mia's hands jumped to cover her mouth as he glared at her for exclaiming. What did he do to get shot? Could it be that Mr. Bennet wasn't really a professor? She had been suspecting right from the beginning that the man wasn't what he claimed he was. The way he fought and the tattoos on his chest, not to mention how he'd managed to climb up to her window with a bullet wound. I will call emergency." She hurriedly turned to grab her phone from her bed, but before she could even turn, he caught her shirt and pulled her back. Despite his wounds, he lacked no strength in pulling her and making her lose her balance. Mia fell over him on the sofa. He groaned when she fell on his body, but then he didn't release her when she quickly tried to stand up. Instead, he looked into her eyes, his face only an inch away from hers, and when he spoke, Mia could feel his warm breath hitting against her face, making her heart jump. "You will not speak a word of this to anyone, and you will not call any emergency. You will get a bottle of alcohol and tweezers, a sterilized knife, along with a needle, and get your tiny ass back here. Do you understand me?" he demanded in a whisper, but his voice and eyes were still as cold as ice. Neil wouldn't want any authorities getting involved and revealing his identity to the world, which would jeopardize his mission at Ivy Grove Institute and put his life in danger at the hands of his enemies. He wouldn't have come into the girl's room if he had another choice. And thankfully the man had shot him with a small caliber ankle gun. It wouldn't cause much harm if taken out immediately. And he needed the girl to cooperate with him without jeopardizing his mission. Mia, who was still held on top of him on the sofa, frowned at his words. He didn't want to go to the hospital, and was commanding her with such a terrifying tone to get those tools for him, not to mention he called her a tiny ass when he needed her help. However, instead of getting mad and insisting on calling the emergency, she was concerned for him. "Do you plan to remove the bullet by yourself?" she managed to ask, ignoring their closeness and the warm blood on her fingertips that lay on the sofa. "No, you will do it. Now go get what I asked." He released her, gently pushing her off of his body and groaning in pain at the slight shift of his muscles. He saw the horror on her face and didn't give her time to protest before he urged, "Hurry, I don't want to lose consciousness, go get the tools." He gritted his teeth and cursed at the burning pain. He had been shot a few times before, but Liam or the military doctor were always there to get the bullet out and treat the wound. He had once removed a bullet from his forearm years ago when he had been shot by a sniper rifle in his own island estate, where he went 2 years ago after that incident to find peace. Back then, there had been no one to help him but himself. He had removed the bullet as how all the army were taught to do in such an emergency situation. But now that the bullet had hit him on his side, he needed someone to get it out and sew the wound if needed. Mia didn't stay to argue upon seeing his pained expression. Despite her panic and fear of seeing too much blood, she nodded and quickly left the room to get the tools he asked for. She went to the kitchen and took a sharp knife from the cabinet. She picked a lighter. Then she suddenly realized they had no alcohol at home. She dropped the knife and sneaked out of their apartment. She walked down the hallway and knocked at the door at the end of the hallway. Not long, the door opened, revealing Julie, whose blonde hair looked like a bird's nest. Mia had come to Julie's room because the girl had a separate room from her family in the building, and knowing the girl's habit, she wouldn't be sleeping by this time of the night and would probably be having fun with one of her many boyfriends. And her messy hair and the bite marks on her neck proved that. When she noticed Mia, she quickly smiled. "Oh, it's you. Have you finally decided to give me tips on how to get a wealthy man?" she asked, eyeing Mia up and down and noticing the slight bloodstain on her lower pink baggy shirt. Julie's eyes gleamed in amusement. "Oh my, so you were still a virgin all this while and have finally been deflowered by. Who were you having fun with in your room? Did you come to take tips from me?" Mia rolled her eyes at the girl's words. Why was it that this girl knows nothing but having fun with men? Mia didn't have much time to cook up an excuse or explain why she had blood on her shirt. A man was bleeding to death in her room, and she needed alcohol. "Julie, if you would be kind enough to borrow me a bottle of alcohol, I will buy you another one tomorrow," she said in a whisper and put on a polite smile. However, Julie, on the other hand, didn't hesitate to nod her head and quickly went inside and returned with a bottle of alcohol. She was smiling in knowing amusement as she assumed Mia was borrowing the alcohol to drink it to mask the pain of her being deflowered by whoever was in her room. She didn't even ask any questions as she handed the bottle to her and whispered, "You don't have to buy me another one. We can be friends from now on." Mia didn't stay to have any more conversation. She thanked the girl and took the bottle and hurried back to their apartment room. Entering the room and closing the door gently behind her, she walked back to the kitchen and got all the things she needed. By the time she returned to her room, Mr. Bennet had removed his jacket and shirt, and was now sitting on the sofa with his back leaning against the wall. Beside him was a guitar case. However, Mia didn't dwell on the guitar case and looked at him worriedly. His eyes were closed and he was breathing strangely. His tattooed chest was left bare, and when her eyes fell on the ominous snake tattoos, her heart jumped in fright. Mia willed herself to approach him. He needed her help. She didn't know why he didn't want to go to a hospital, but she didn't waste time trying to think and put down the tools on the sofa. His eyes snapped open when he felt her movement. I've got everything you asked for," she said, with her voice slightly trembling. "Are you really sure I shouldn't call the cops and report?" "No." He cut her off sternly and then began to instruct her on what to do. "Sterilize the tools.